I didn't want this show to be the social justice show. I didn't want this show to be the show with the true crime show hosted by a Black person, right? I wanted it to fit firmly within the true crime genre, but to be unique, just sort of like because it was. I feel like a lot of those things that you're kind of referencing, kind of calling out these systems or calling out the ways that maybe the police, repeatedly messes up. These are the kinds of conversations I was having with my friends. These are the sort of things that I was thinking about. This is maybe informed by my own experience navigating the criminal legal process.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. I'm joined today by another podcaster. Celisia Stanton is the host of Truer Crime, a true crime podcast that's a little different from all the rest. She's also a Minneapolis resident, which is cool. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
PeggySue Imihy, who is a Wedge Live fan favorite, introduced us. And
Yes.
Apparently she's the kind of person who thinks, I have two friends who both have podcasts. They're such original people that they both have podcasts. They should know each other. And that's what she did to us.
That's what a good friend does. It's a connector.
Honestly, first impression, I'm like, oh, your friend has a podcast? Great.
Right.
But I listened to it, slickly produced. It's nothing like the Wedge Live podcast. It is a real professional, well-done podcast, well-written. You sound
Thank you.
great. It's got that kind of eerie background noise that's very subtle that a true crime podcast will have the whole way through. I listened to it. It's great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And yeah, it's definitely undergone a little bit of an evolution because when I first started the show, I was producing it entirely independently, kind of just knew nothing about podcasting and was going for it. And then eventually ended up getting acquired by a production company and they were able to kind of help me tune up some things. So okay. I'm glad to hear you liked it.
I'm curious how you even come to doing something like that. Have you always been a storyteller? Like, what is your road to podcasting before we even get into the true crime part?
Yeah. So for me, it was pretty untraditional. I have been a wedding and portrait photographer for many years, and that's kind of what I was doing in 2020 or when the pandemic hit. Obviously, not a lot of events going on being a wedding photographer, so there was a lot more downtime. Then, when George Floyd was killed, I was really involved with the sort of activism and the uprising that started as a result of that. And I started posting some things on social media just around racial justice issues based in my own lived experience as a Black woman. And then also just things that I had kind of learned along the way. I did debate in high school. I've been a debate coach for a decade plus. And so had a lot of kind of like interest in engaging critically on issues of current importance. So that kind of led me to making these sort of like different graphics online. And I had a number of those go viral. And I built this platform kind of out of nowhere in June of 2020, just around that work. And I knew I wanted to continue to do some things related to that, but I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like. And I very quickly sort of was getting burnt out with sort of just the grind of just mistakenly kind of creating this huge platform on Instagram about racial justice issues where they kind of there's an expectation that you're going to be almost like a content farm, right? I'm not a real person who has kind of other dynamic things or interesting things to share about my life. It's really just what value can I provide people to educate them on these issues. And so I knew that wasn't that didn't really align with who I was and how I like to engage with issues, because I like to talk about things in a nuanced way. So I didn't know how that was going to evolve, but I kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And then sort of tangentially, at the end of the summer of 2020, I started working with this financial advisor. Being self-employed, I was like, okay, let me start making a plan for retirement, figure out how I'm going to kind of like put money aside, all that financial stuff. Also, just in my own experience, feeling like Black folks, women are traditionally excluded from so many financial systems. I really wanted some guidance on how to navigate. So I started working with this financial advisor who was really well known in sort of like, I would say like Minneapolis community, but also like within Black spaces, because he was a Black financial advisor. And that obviously is pretty rare. So we really connected because he was like, hey, I have this mission of really wanting to help folks who are traditionally excluded from these from these systems. So great. We start working together. I start investing, my savings with him. And then come to find out a few months later, I'd find out towards the end of 2020 that he was actually defrauding all of his investor clients. So he stole all of the money I had invested with him, as well as all the money that, his other clients had invested with him. It ended up being over $2 million. And so that was obviously a really sort of shocking thing to have happen. And I didn't really know what to do in the aftermath of that. And I found myself just spending a lot of time, honestly, just like sitting around my house, listening to true crime podcasts, doing puzzles, and just like not really trying to think about the fact that this had just happened, while kind of like also trying to navigate the criminal legal system, because now the FBI was completed their investigation on him and charges were being pressed. So as I was listening to all this true crime, I was like constantly pausing it and complaining to my husband, like, I feel like these stories, obviously I was like addicted to them in some sense because I kept listening to them, but I just felt like there was so much missing. Like, they weren't really talking about race or gender or sexuality or how those things play into crime. Why is it that people commit crimes? How do we actually stop these things from happening in the future? And how, and in so many shows, I felt like, we're claiming to be victim-centered, but that kind of might be limited to the victim was beautiful and, had this great personality. And to me, being somebody who had been the victim of this financial crime and navigating the criminal legal process, victim-centered didn't look like being flattering towards me and the other victims. It felt like it should be something that's like rooted in how do we stop this sort of thing from happening again in the future. Right. And I felt like a lot of true crime media in general was a lot of fear. It was a lot of fear-based things like, anyone could be out to get you and you can never fully trust anybody. And I just felt like, what if these stories had the capability to be connecting to folks? What if they had the opportunity to make us feel less afraid of one another? And so all that's converging with sort of this experience that I had had growing this platform around racial and social justice, and this new experience now navigating the system. And I kind of complained one day to my husband and he kind of interrupted me. He was like, all right, enough of the complaints. Why don't you just start your own show? And I was like, actually, that's a good one. That's a good idea. So I ended up just producing that first season and putting it out just a few months later in the spring of 2021. And that's how I ended up there. So it was very kind of random, just like a culmination of a lot of different factors. But I really just wanted to create a show that was the type of true crime show that I wanted to hear that I just wasn't finding out there.
So I listened to like 3 episodes yesterday, and the first one, it's a very traditional true crime setup, like the kind of story you picked for the first episode. Darlie Roudier, I think is how you say her name, the woman the mother. Yeah,
Darlie Roudier.
But even though it's the typical kind of true crime story, you insert ideas that like, wait a second, audience. I just want to remind you, murder is uncommon. Violent crime is down. Very, very common things that you insert into it. Even though you're doing it, you're keeping true to a lot of the true crime conventions. I don't want to give anyone the impression that they won't enjoy your podcast if they also enjoy other true crime podcasts. Like you enjoy those things and you've kept true to that. You also say cooperating with the police doesn't always work out for the supposed victim. So you're peppering your stories with all these reminders. Why tell the story that way?
Yeah. So for me, I wanted, so in the Darlie Roudier episode is interesting because it was the first episode I put out, but it was also the first one I wrote. And I started with that episode because I wanted to see if I could tell a story that was told a lot in true crime spaces. This was a story I had heard covered before. I just knew was had been covered a lot in true crime media. But if I could tell that story, but with a different perspective, where it would feel like somebody who listened to a lot of true crime would still get something new and different out of it. So it was kind of like a test case for me in that way. And because a big part of it for me too, and you kind of note this, is like, I didn't want this show to be the social justice show. I didn't want this show to be the show with the true crime show hosted by a Black person, right? I wanted it to fit firmly within the true crime genre, but to be unique, just sort of like, because it was just like in how you consumed it. You were ending up in a different place than you maybe would with some of your other favorite shows, but the journey felt similar. And so for me, I feel like a lot of those things that you're kind of referencing, kind of calling out these systems or calling out the ways that maybe the police, repeatedly messes up, are more, it's not so intentional that I'm always thinking about it. It's more just, this is my perspective and how I see the world, how I approach these types of stories, because these are the kinds of conversations I was having with my friends. These are the sort of things that I was thinking about. This is maybe informed by my own experience navigating the criminal legal process, and how I felt throughout that process. So it was it's always this careful balance for me of really wanting to make a statement, because obviously I think that stories have so much potential to shape what people do and drive action. So I don't want to just be purely neutral, right? I want to forward a particular perspective, but also putting it in this format that is consumable for people, because I want them to listen to it.
And then the second episode, you feature a Black serial killer, and you note how we think of serial killers as exclusively white men, and we don't. In the media, we have not recognized this Black serial killer, who is actually the most prolific serial killer in the country, and how maybe it's because of who he was killing. He was killing Black women. And can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this to me was an interesting case because I had never heard about it before. And this is Samuel Little. And I had never heard of him. And I thought that was weird, because there's such an obsession with serial killers in our, culture, right? There's no shortage of true crime podcasts, TV shows, dramatized dramatized fictional TV shows based on the true events. All of those exist out there. We have Criminal Minds, we have all that stuff. So people have the appetite for hearing about Samuel Little and his victims, and yet we're not talking about it. And so that to me automatically made this case a case that fit with kind of the perspective that I wanted to drive with Truer Crime, with the show. And I wanted to really explore that a little bit more, why is it that we don't talk about him? Why is it that, his name isn't a household name in the way that, Dahmer is? And I feel like a lot of that is because of who he was targeting, not just Black women, but particularly sex workers. And, a lot of folks don't know that sex workers are the most likely victims by far of serial killers. If you're a sex worker, your odds of being killed by a serial killer just go up dramatically. And I think that when we watch or when we consume popular true crime media, we think that we might be the victim of a serial killer, that you better lock your doors at night and cross the street if you're walking next to someone sketchy. But really, it's these vulnerable folks who are in these positions where they get targeted because they know the people who are targeting them know that nobody is going to be looking into it. And that's why Samuel Little was able to get away with what he was doing for so long, is because nobody was really looking into these cases. And then sometimes when they were, of course, this is a population of folks who doesn't necessarily feel comfortable with police, doesn't necessarily feel comfortable going and testifying in a court. And so all of those things allowed him to continue to perpetuate this pattern of behavior. And he knew it too. That's what's so unfortunate and just disturbing, I think, about the case as well, is that Samuel Little has gone on record saying that he targeted these people specifically because he knew that essentially nobody cared about them. And so to me, that's the whole concept of truer crime, right? It's how do we tell true crime in a truer way, in a way that is more aligned with what's happening in the real world. And for me, it's like, if we're going to talk about serial killers, we need to talk about who are the types of people who are most commonly the victims of serial killers.
So looking ahead to season 2 of Truer Crime, like, what kind of stories are you drawn to? What makes a good subject for one of your episodes? What do you want to see?
Yeah, for me, there's so many things that draw me to an episode. I mean, I'm getting episode ideas in a lot of different ways. Sometimes, folks are recommending them to me. Sometimes I'm running across an article that kind of makes me dig deeper on an issue. Sometimes I'm finding it in a Reddit thread. And I wanted to cover really the range of stories, because True Crime is an episodic show. Every episode is a different case. And I think, especially in true crime podcasting, there's a lot of what we call like limited series. So it'll be like one case told over a series of episodes, maybe 8 to 12 episodes, and you really get to dive deep. And I felt like there was really this space in the episodic true crime world to kind of add some of the nuance that gets lost when you are having to do a different case every week. If you do a different case every week, you can only spend so much time working on it, researching it, investigating it, right? And so I wanted to kind of try to bridge the gap between these limited series and these episodic shows to create something that was an episodic show but had that nuanced, limited feeling. And so for me, that also meant doing a range of cases. So some of the cases we're doing are like Darlie Roudier, like the case we already talked about, where it's an infamous case. A lot of people are covering it, and I'm trying to inject sort of a new perspective on it. Some other ones that we've done in the past is like Jonestown, right? Everyone thinks they know the story of Jonestown. Certainly they know the who drank the Kool-Aid or you drank the Kool-Aid sort of line that goes around. But most people don't know that People's Temple primarily targeted folks with a message of racial and social justice, and that the Black Panthers were, kind of like applauding Jim Jones for his racial justice work, and that the majority of the folks who were killed are in the mass suicide at Jonestown in Guyana were Black women. And so it's sort of that angle that was new. Or in this upcoming season, we're going to be covering the Manson murders over 2 episodes. And that's a case that super popular. Everybody knows it. It's been covered everywhere. But, a lot of folks don't know that the details of the fact that Charles Manson wanted to incite a race war, and how all of that kind of played in, and how he hoped to pin the killings on the Black Panthers. So a lot of that. And then I also like to do stories, of course, that folks have never heard of, but highlight some of those truths about the world that we're living in. So we talked about the case of Samuel Little, but on the upcoming season, we're going to be doing an episode on a woman named Sonia Ivanoff, who was a young woman living in Nome, Alaska, who was killed by police. And then, in my first season, I did another episode on this young man named Josiah Sutton, who was convicted and incarcerated for raping a woman based on DNA evidence. Turns out Josiah Sutton did not commit that crime. And only later did they find out that the DNA evidence that they thought was so solid wasn't so solid. And what's really interesting in that episode is I really got to dive into the fact that DNA evidence in general is actually not as foolproof as people think it is. There's a lot of errors that can happen. There's a lot of interpretation differences that can happen between folks who are maybe analyzing DNA evidence. Most people you hear, your DNA was left to the scene shut and closed, but there's more detail there. And then the last category of case that I like to cover is cases that normally get relegated to history. They're typically not covered on a true crime show. They're going to be covered on some kind of history, maybe in a documentary show. But to me, if you have a crime that happened in history that has all of these kind of interesting elements to it, that's a true crime story. So in season 1, we cover the Tulsa Race Massacre, for example. And there is a way you can tell that story that kind of aligns with the way that people are used to consuming true crime. And I think when we don't tell those stories in that way, it does a disservice to, the takeaways that we could still be learning in the present from all these things that have happened in the past. So I kind of run the gamut there. And then, of course, we'll also do cases where maybe the perpetrator is not somebody that you would normally expect. I think a lot of times in true crime, you have this very black and white idea that there's the victim, and then there's evil perpetrator, who needs to be brought to justice. And sometimes things are a little bit more complicated than that, right? Obviously, we have instances of wrongful conviction, right, where maybe the government is the perpetrator of a crime insofar as they're wrongly incarcerating a person. So we're covering the case of DeForest Johnson in our upcoming season. And he is on death row in Alabama for a crime that he did not commit. So really all different types of things. I think if you're somebody who listens to true crime or enjoys history or just kind of likes deep dives on topics, we like the cult scenario with Jonestown or even Manson, then I think that you'll probably find an episode that resonates with you or that will be interesting to kind of learn more about.
So when we started, talked about your origin and how you came to this, you said you were a victim of a crime. I'm wondering, what did your experience as a victim, maybe dealing with police or authorities in some way, what did that teach you about what victims need, maybe your frustrations with the system? Did you learn anything from that?
Yeah, I think that one thing that people don't really think about explicitly very often is that the purpose of the criminal justice system in this country is not to make the victim whole or achieve justice for the victim. The purpose is to punish for breaking the law. And so that priority becomes very clear if you've ever actually had to navigate the system. I was assigned a victim advocate, which I feel like I should say in quotes because that was their role, but I never felt like that role was fulfilled. So it was a name only because really I had to follow up with her for every piece of information I'd want, oftentimes multiple times. There wasn't any kind of, perhaps she had some kind of training in psychology or social work or something like that. But I didn't necessarily feel that. I didn't feel like she was necessarily providing any of that sort of support that you might expect from a victim advocate. I felt very confused throughout much of the process, of what my rights were, of what was happening at any given time. There are long periods of time where there's just kind of no information, and that was confusing. Sometimes it would be even if I'd be trying to get information, I'd be told that I wasn't allowed to have that information. And that can be very, I feel confusing to feel wait, this person is being charged or pursued because of actions they did against me. And yet I'm not allowed to be privy to what's going on or what the next steps are going to be. And so for me, that gave me just a lot more empathy and understanding for what it might be like for victims' families to have to navigate the system. And really, I was also kind of struggling with, as this was happening, my own experience of feeling leading up to getting defrauded, I had all these kind of broad beliefs about how the system should be changed or reformed or, maybe the police should be defunded or, all these things. And that was kind of something that I had to really tackle when I'm the one who actually is having to go through it and be well, how much do I believe in these systems? Because now I'm relying on it. And so for me, it was just really interesting to have to kind of hold both truths of feeling this is my only avenue for justice, whatever that's supposed to mean, or restitution, literally to get some of that money back. And yet I knew and understood before and during it was being demonstrated to me that the system didn't work. So that's something that I think that for any person, all the cases I cover when I'm kind of exploring, or sometimes I'll get to connect with the family members or the victims, depending on what the case is. And I'm able to just kind of connect a little bit more with this sense that, of course, they sometimes just really want everyone wants something different, but sometimes they really want vengeance for what happened to their loved one. Or, sometimes people feel a lot more just forgiving. Everyone reacts a little bit differently, but I think just having my experience and then getting to see kind of how other folks who were victimized by the same financial advisor I was reacted kind of just gave me a deeper understanding of just how unique everyone's experience is.
Do you have enthusiastic friends and family who are like, they know you host a true crime podcast and they're like, oh, I found one for you?
So it's kind of funny because I feel like so many of the close people in my life are like, oh, I never listen to true crime. Or I can't listen to true crime. So it's kind of the opposite. Like my mom always is like, she has to like work herself up to be able to listen because it's just like it's sad. It's sad. And especially I think if you're telling the stories in a very like mindful way, which I try to do, then it should feel heavy. It should feel sad. So a little bit of the opposite.
Oh, you don't have enthusiasm. Well, let me be your enthusiastic friend or family here. So, I assume you follow local news a little bit. Did you hear about Edgar Barrientos Quintana, the man who was exonerated recently after 16 years? He was convicted of murder. Have you heard about that one?
You'll have to tell me the details of the case.
Okay.
The name isn't ringing a bell, but possibly.
So one of the details that came out is that Minneapolis cops were participating in the First 48, the crime show about a murder. Are you familiar with that show? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They were staging portions of their investigation for a reality show, the First 48.
What do you mean?
Like they were scripting things, some of which were not true. Like,
because they were on the First 48?
Yeah, it's supposed to be a reality show. They're supposed to be covering things that are actually
I didn't realize
happening.
that the MPD was like a part of the First 48.
Yeah, they feature various police departments, and at that time, Minneapolis was one of them. And so one of the cops who was involved in this there was a whole lot of problems with the investigation, one of which is all the witnesses said Barrientos Quintana was, or the murderer was completely bald-headed, shaved head, but he's on a security video that day with a full head of hair. In addition to like, how could he possibly have traveled that distance? It was a botched case. He got railroaded for sure. And one of the cops involved in the investigation is now MPD's assistant chief of community trust. What a job title.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Just an incredible story.
Yeah. And actually, this is kind of reminiscent. I'm covering a case on the new season about the Jeff Davis 8, which is 8 women who were victimized in Louisiana. And that story it becomes this more of like a profile of the city or the county that it's happening in. And just like so much police misconduct, but it is really interesting because there's instances where there's like concrete evidence that different officers are potentially involved in covering up, like maybe being like directly involved in covering up a murder, and then they're promoted or handed a new great title, or somebody maybe steals something from the evidence room and then they're promoted to be the evidence director. And it's actually so commonplace. It's like hearing that this is happening in MPD is alarming, but also just like, this so tracks with what's happening across the country and so many other local police departments. And because also if you're in a place like Minneapolis, or if you're in a place like a city in a small town in Louisiana, maybe people aren't paying as much attention to you. You're not going to be getting as much attention as like the mayor of New York City is getting, or the district attorney in California, a district attorney in California is getting. So but that is interesting. I haven't heard that case.
So we're speaking in December. This episode is going to air in January. And so this is why I'm going to ask a question that will be terribly outdated by the time this airs. The United Healthcare CEO assassin, do you have any reaction to the way that was covered in the news? Like what from your perspective as the host of True or Crime, like what jumps out at you about the way that story was covered, the public reaction to it? What are you thinking? Yeah,
I mean, I think this is just, it's such an interesting moment. I think in, I guess, history, but also just like the cultural moment we're in. I feel like for me, because I tell a lot of true crime stories and because I really try to hold humanity for people, and just like really not brush over the fact that, you know, when I'm covering the case of someone being killed, it's like that was a real person. And here, you know, like wanting the listener to feel that. For me, when I hear about this case or when I hear about this happening, I'm like, I mean, that's awful for his family, right? Obviously, we all know that like the public reaction to him being killed was, you know, there's a lot of maybe justifying of the murder, a lot of like valorizing of the suspected killer. Also like some weird things about how he's like really attractive and kind of like a lot of meme making and things like that. And so for me, it's a little bit disturbing, mostly from the perspective of just like, I think that it is really important that we always stay very tapped into like our humanity and like, you know, underseeing people as people, because it's really easy to be like, oh, especially in a polarized society like we live in right now, it's really easy to be like my team, their team. But when we start not seeing humanity in individuals, then that quickly becomes a much bigger problem. And that's just a pattern I've seen in telling a lot of true crime stories. But I do think that it's opened up this like really important conversation, obviously, about the state of healthcare in this country and the real grievances that a lot of people have. I mean, I think that it's a terrible thing that happened, but hopefully this conversation can yield, you know, some results, and, you know, we can have this greater understanding that like people need something different. They are wanting something different. And it is scary that we're living in a time of like increased political violence. And this isn't necessarily directly political violence, but I think it's definitely close or adjacent to that. Right now, I'm actually, at the time of this episode, we'll have just put out an episode on the MLK assassination, which was also a time of like a lot of political violence. You know, you had JFK and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and all kind of back to back in a few short years. So to me, some of the things are mirroring here. It's like it's great that we're having these really important conversations, and it's a little bit frightening to know that this is kind of the situation that we're in.
It got me thinking about victims and like the effort, the monumental effort that police are put into this case. Like, I'm thinking, if I was the victim, would they have scoured the city for every possible camera angle because that takes a lot of manpower to acquire all that camera footage in such a short period of time. They went to a lot of trouble. Killing this CEO was not acceptable in a way that maybe if it's a different kind of person, we kind of let it go. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think that in general, there's always a focus on certain types of victims, whether that be like race-based or wealth-based or, you know, anything else. It's like there are people that we deem sort of valuable and people we deem not valuable. And I think in this case, it does. Obviously, there's a level of like virality to this moment. And then you kind of, once something goes viral, you sort of feel like you have to put a bunch of resources behind it. But it kind of is reminiscent to me also of like, you know, the disappearance and murder of Gabby Petito. Awful case where this young woman is killed by her boyfriend. There's like everybody, we believe that she was killed by her boyfriend. But, you know, where all the country is all of a sudden like kind of looking into it and wanting to try to help solve the case and sending in tips and all of that. And I think that there was a lot of reaction in the moment in the weeks after Gabby Petito went missing from Indigenous groups, for example, who were like, hey, you know, like this many Indigenous women disappeared in the same state that, you know, Gabby Petito was last seen in, and none of their stories are told. So I think obviously it's not about these cases that get highlighted not being important and not deserving a full investigation, but it is just definitely interesting to see who gets the focus and who doesn't. So this is a local news podcast based in Minneapolis. And do you consume a lot of local crime news? Crime is a big political topic here over the last couple of years. Do you have any thoughts about that? Critiques? Yeah, I mean, I don't like consume a ton of specific like Minneapolis crime news, I guess, in the same like from like a true crime perspective of like, okay, like
looking into cases that I might tell on the show or anything like that. But like, I think obviously just being in Minneapolis, I live in Minneapolis, and have lived here for a long time. I grew up just in a first ring suburb right outside. And I love the city. And obviously, there are a lot of issues. I mean, I think that, you had even before George Floyd, you had Philando Castile, and well, just kind of looking at St. Paul, I guess, but just broader Minnesota. But like when George Floyd was killed, I think obviously there's just been so much that feels like it's still unresolved. It feels like nothing has meaningfully changed. I felt a lot like when George Floyd was killed, there was obviously this huge global uprising, which is great because that, brings attention to these issues and hopefully change would happen. But then I felt that like when Derek Chauvin was convicted, it was almost like all of that ended. Like it was like, this is because we have put away this individual person. Now all of a sudden there's no need anymore for this movement that has been built. I kind of like thinking about it through a historical perspective. I'm very much like, instead of maybe thinking about it while this was all happening, maybe I was thinking like, oh, this is sort of like we could be in like the middle or towards the beginning of the Black Lives Matter era. But I actually sort of feel like the killing of George Floyd was maybe the end of it, ending, of course, with the Derek Chauvin's conviction. And so for me, I feel like since that conviction, there's just so many issues in the city that are still unresolved. We're a city that's still, and especially in South Minneapolis, reeling from the pandemic. You have Uptown that is not, kind of in this struggle of like wanting to like be revitalized. You have a lot of encampments, and like we have nothing, like, we're like forcibly shutting down the encampments, but these folks have nowhere specific to go. And so we're not actually solving the problem. And then people feel like that's all tied up in crime, right? Because they're like, oh, well, more crime is happening around the areas where these encampments are. Or, like for me, I live in Uptown, and I would, every day I go outside and, often there will be a line of cars whose windows have all been smashed in, right? And I think that these are all like symptoms of a community that's recovering from the uprising, from the pandemic, that's struggling with those things, also like with inflation. And that's something that's happening obviously across the country, across the world. But nobody has this perfect solution. And I feel like I don't know what the solution is, but it's definitely something I'm feeling and thinking about on a day-to-day basis living here.
I didn't know you were in Uptown. I'm in the Wedge. Are you also in the Wedge?
I'm in like, I guess, I don't know. People get very like, they're very strict about their lines, So I'm like, not really. Whittier, I'm like right off of, but I'm close to Lindale. Yeah. So I'm very close. I'm walkable to the Wedge.
You're going to get a lot of hate from Wedge Live listeners because that's definitely not Uptown. Whittier.
Oh, okay. I know. I like to say Uptown because I'm just like, it's all kind of the same. But to me, because it's all like walkable, it's so dense. So it's like if I can walk to it, and especially in a city whose public transportation isn't very good, if I can walk there, then I'm like, well, it's all the same. But yeah, I guess technically not Uptown proper, Whittier.
It's a great place to live, the Wedge Whittier area, the Wedge Whittier metropolitan area.
Yes.
Do you have any recommendations? I guess we're done, and I wonder if you have anything to recommend to the audience besides your wonderful podcast, True or Crime. Season 2 has begun airing. As you listen to this, you can also click over to True or Crime and listen to at least one of those episodes and the entire first season. I did it.
Yes. Yeah. You can binge the back catalog and then go through. We're going to be releasing weekly at the time that this is coming out and catch those as well. In terms of like finding me, you can find me on Instagram at Celisia Stanton. And then I also have a Substack newsletter called Sincerely Celisia, which is sincerelyselecia.substack.com. And that is not true crime. It is more like my just kind of musings on cultural commentary, thoughts about things that are happening. And also, I share lots of like recommendations, movies and TV and podcasts to listen to and all that good stuff. So like that's the place to go for all the recommendations because I put it out every Friday and I always got something new for you. So that's where I'd recommend.
And give me a Whittier recommendation. What should I be doing in Whittier? Where should I be going?
Well, okay, now I feel put on the spot because I'm like, well, I'm scared to like cross over a line and be like, that's not Whittier anymore. We're in a different part of the city.
Minneapolis, anywhere.
Minneapolis, yeah. Well, I guess, I'm safe talking about each street because that's firmly Whittier, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I love the food scene here. So I'm always trying out new restaurants and things like that. There's a brand new Cantonese restaurant that just opened on, I guess this is probably the Lynn Lake neighborhood, but like at the corner of Lindale and Lake Street. And they have dim sum, which I haven't gotten to try yet, but I really want to try. So I'm kind of like auditioning it to see if I'm going to become a regular there. And then I really like, there's a bar in Whittier called Prodigal, and I feel like it's just like a really good vibe. Like it has that divey feel that a lot of people like in a bar, but it doesn't have that. It's very welcoming. I feel like you go into a dive bar and a lot of times it's like, are they happy you're there? I'm not really sure, but that's part of the thing. But here it's super welcoming. Every time you come in, you're getting like a really warm greeting. The food's pretty good, good place to hang out with friends. So those are a couple that I'm like, I'm calling them like Michigan star places. This is like something I heard on another podcast, which is like, what is the place that is like your neighborhood go-to? Like, it's not going to be winning any awards. It's not going to be on any like top lists, but like you love it. And so those are a couple of mine.
The Michigan star.
Yes.
My guest has been Celisia Stanton, a host of Truer Crime. Season 2 has just begun. You can go listen now. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you to PeggySue Imihy for bringing us together. Thank you, PeggySue. I know you're listening to this one at least. And thanks to all of you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now. Right now.